All right, I'll have to check back now to see if that's my trick, is managing my conversation with you and following all the questions, because I don't have a producer here to help me.
Okay.
All right. Welcome, everybody, and this is Real Talk Livestream. Today, I'm Lisa Jamieson, and I have a guest with me today named Jolene Philo, author of a number of books. We'll tell you more about some of those as we go along, but one we're especially interested in talking about today is Sharing Love Abundantly with Special Needs Families. It's co-written with author Gary Chapman. It's the 5 love languages for families raising children with disabilities, and I absolutely love that book. You'll find it funny, Jolene. I don't have my copy. Not only do I constantly have it loaned out to somebody, but this week, the reason I don't have it is because Carly's main caregiver is borrowing it, and she is not able to come to work this week because she had a very, very questionable exposure to COVID.
Okay.
And she had the book with her. But I have a very well marked up copy of a pre-release version of the transcript.
Okay.
Transcript, because I was one of the privileged many who got to read it before it released, and it's very well marked up, and that served me well in preparing for. Never did I imagine about a little over a year ago when I was reading that I would actually get to interview live, that I would even have technology and knowledge to be able to do this, and I think we're successful. So I'm really glad you're here.
Oh, I'm glad to be with you. Thanks for having me.
For folks who maybe haven't watched one of these with us before, and certainly may have seen Jolene in other places, I just want to review a couple of things. The host of these Real Talk live streams we're doing now and then is Walk Right In Ministries. Walk Right In Ministries is building faith and community with special needs families and really caregivers of all generations. So there's a lot of different folks, but we especially find that there's a lot of people watching here who are parents of someone experiencing special needs of some kind. I myself am the mom of 3 girls in their 20s. The youngest is Carly. She has Angelman syndrome, and she's the only one still living here at home with us. And we are finding that a great privilege, especially with COVID and watching a number of our friends with adults who are in group homes and things who haven't been able to see them for quite a while. So as challenging as it is at times to manage her needs and everything, especially in this COVID season, we are so glad that she is with us. So glad. And I know, Jolene, you'll probably talk more about this too, but you're living with parts of your family too, very much on purpose. So that'll probably factor into some of our conversation today.
Yes, yes.
So Walk Right In Ministries, for those who may not be familiar, there's a couple things that we offer. Caregiver Consulting is one. We do counseling and coaching with caregivers, even adult siblings or growing siblings that are having some caregiver role. We offer some print resources, a couple things you can download for free online at our website, walkrightin.org, and others you can order on Amazon. So you can find us even by searching for me, Lisa Jamieson, on Amazon to find the different books that we have there. We're going to do a giveaway today too with a bundle of one of my books and one of Jolene's books. So we'll talk more about that in a couple of minutes. We also offer some peer support kind of groups, like currently we have weekly a virtual small group community meeting to just have faith-based conversation. We're calling that Real Talk Multiply, and we meet on Tuesdays on Zoom at 2:00 p.m. in Central Time every afternoon on Tuesday. And a lot of people are part of that, able to just jump in every couple weeks, not every week. So you don't have to commit to being there all the time. And it's just been a wonderfully encouraging, Bible-based spontaneous kind of conversation based on basic principles of how to strengthen our families. So we're having a great time doing that. If you have interest, connect with me at lisa@walkrightin.org. So a couple ways you can reach us. As special needs families, I know we really need encouragement, and we just appreciate simple, highly effective resources that we can get through quickly because we don't have a lot of time to read a lot of books. But I can tell you guys, any book that Jolene writes, you want to read it. And you have a way of writing that I find very easy to read too. I can read them quickly and kind of digest things and even set it down and get back to it a week or two later if things interrupt my process. And it's just very clear and able to pick it right back up where I left off. So I just encourage people to check out everything that you've written. Jolene's books include Different Dream Parenting, a Different Dream Devotional. More recently, Does My Child Have PTSD? Which I read for both personal and professional reasons and just found it incredibly valuable. Just a kind of a primer almost on some of the basics of some trauma and mental health stuff that can affect any of us really in some ways. And I also found it very encouraging because like we're going to talk about today, one of the ways that book weaves into our conversation today is that you really make a good point in that book of talking about how when parents just love their kids well, just give them a safe, comfortable home to grow up in without even worrying about all the other resources that might be needed, they can overcome a lot of things in life, a lot of traumas or adversity of a lot of kinds if they just really at the core of it know that they're loved. And we can't always do that perfectly, but one of the reasons we're here today is to just explore together some ways that we can do that as well as possible, is love our kids and make sure they know they're loved. Because a lot of us kind of knew we were loved, but we weren't always loved the way we needed to be loved and so on. So, you and Hiram, your husband, you started learning a long time ago about Gary Chapman's love languages. And you tell some of that story in the book, so I don't need you to take a lot of our time repeating it. But just, tell us a little bit about why you were inspired to talk about things like trauma and loving your family well.
Sure. Well, I think the main reason I started writing about trauma is because of our son. He's our oldest child, born in 1982. And he was born with a life-threatening birth defect that required immediate surgery about 750 miles away from where he was born. So he had that surgery at birth before he was a day old, and then another surgery at 2 months. By the time he was 5, he'd had 7 surgeries and hundreds of medical procedures and, tests and all sorts of things. Then he did very well until age 15 when he had a final surgery. And he did well in school. He was, just kind of one of those model kids. Everybody liked him, very talented, very creative. But we started seeing some different behaviors starting at middle school. And eventually we realized something was wrong. And he was 26 when we were able finally to get a diagnosis in 2006. Or maybe 2008. But anyway, he went through treatment for post-traumatic stress disorder, which had been caused by all that early medical trauma he went through. And we saw such a change in him so quickly that I was just like, why isn't this more widely known? Because we were told where he was treated, we can treat kids as young as 3. Of course, that wasn't available when he was born. But I thought, if there are kids out there now, man, we need to be treating them early and parents need to know about it. And so I wrote that book just to kind of explain what is already well known in the mental health care community, but for some reason is not getting out to the general public the way it is. And I tried to write it in that very clear manner you talked about. I taught school for 25 years. And I credit the fact that I can write clearly to having taught 4th graders things like the 3 kinds of rocks and and how to divide, long division. You learn how to get to the very core of things and say it clearly, with a lot of illustrations and imagery so that people can learn. So you can thank all my former students that I can write clearly. So that led to that book, and that also led to any of my other books about parenting kids with special needs. And as an educator, I teamed up with another educator named Katie Weatherby, and we wrote a book called Every Child Welcome, which is a ministry handbook for churches to welcome every child. And we took what we knew of as moms of kids with special needs and what we knew in education and tried to demystify that so people, volunteers in churches and church leaders, can welcome kids into their congregations. And so then this latest book, which here it is, Sharing Love Abundantly in Special Needs Families, the idea came about a few years ago. A friend emailed me, who sometimes guest blogs at my blog, differentdream.com, and she said, when are you going to write a book about the 5 love languages and parents of kids with special needs? And it was just like, oh my goodness, I had never thought of that. It was a great idea. And truly, through the work and timing and grace of God, all the connections were made. As I like to say, my people talk to Dr. Chapman's people. The thing is, he has a lot more people than I do. I have an agent, basically. And he said, I have always wanted to do a book like this, but I don't have the expertise. And I've been waiting for someone to come along who could help apply that. And for some reason, that person was me. So that's how this book came about. And you talked about effective, easy to use tools for parents. And what is easier than the 5 love languages? You know, once you kind of get the basic concepts down, it doesn't have to be expensive. It doesn't have to be elaborate. It can be very simple and make a big difference in our lives as caregiving families.
Yeah, well, in fact, that's one of the things, as I was even reviewing parts of the introduction over the last few days, I was struck that either you or Gary in that book talks about the fact that we're not trying to add more of a sense of obligation on these families, because it's really a matter of often just tweaking something you're already doing. Like, the reality is we love our children. There are a number of obstacles that keep us from doing that as well as we'd like to do it, or as well as we know they deserve to be loved. But you use the word demystify. That's one of the things I think that book does very well too, is it kind of demystifies the overwhelm we can get by wanting to do things better than what we sometimes feel equipped to do.
Right. You know, and we have to get to that point where we can say to ourselves, you know what? I've done enough for today. It may not be enough for tomorrow, but it's enough for today, and enough is enough. And if you've done it with your whole heart as a parent, and you have loved your child to the best of your ability, to because you care for your child and because you want to do what God calls us to do, he's going to honor that. And
Yeah.
so this book is just, you know, simple ways, not that I thought of. I interviewed a lot of families that use the love languages, and they shared what they've done with their children who have special needs. And they're truly the stars of the book, because they just shared so willingly and had such wonderful ideas.
There are a lot of great anecdotal stories in there that people can relate to and kind of adapt to their own family. Yeah. It's so true.
Issues from special needs all across the map, you know, children with physical disabilities, mental health issues, behavioral issues, intellectual problems, medically fragile kids, all over.
Yeah, and generationally too. I feel like, and maybe generationally isn't the right word, but across all ages. You know, I've talked to moms over the years who lament that their kids are already grown and there's so many things they wish they'd done differently. And I think, you know, it's not too late. You can still grow in love and reconciliation, everything, with a 45-year-old daughter or son, as much as you could have potentially done better when they were 12. You know, I remember when Carly was little and we were tapping into some really leading edge at the time therapies for her, and a mom at our church whose son was 3 times Carly's age kind of lamenting, like showing appreciation, encouragement to me, while also lamenting that she didn't maybe do more for her son or have those kind of resources available when he was little. And I really just felt for her, but I also just could not say enough to her. You did awesome with him, like you did, and you didn't have what we have. Sometimes the curse of younger moms, even younger than me now, is that we have such a plethora of things, it's hard to know where to go, or you feel pressure to know all of it. I find great comfort in feeling, knowing that the truth of God's word tells us we don't have to keep just trying harder. We really just need to trust him, draw nearer to him and trust him. Because if we're close to the Lord, it's ultimately going to flow out of us into our families as the fruit of the Spirit.
Yeah. And I think too, when we know the love language concepts, we can look back, someone my age, I'm going to turn 64 soon. And my mother is going to be 92 soon, and she's in a memory care unit, though she's pretty cognizant most of the time. But she was not a lovey-dovey kind of person. And, it would be easy for me to look back and say, well, she never really said, I love you. She didn't do this. In fact, some people watching may know that my father was disabled the whole time I was growing up too. And Dr. Chapman, when we were talking about the book, he said, I wonder if you could include some stories about your growing up years in the book. And I said, well, I'll try, but to be honest, I'm not sure how much love language material we're going to get out of that, because just the other day after I visited Mom, I said, Mom, I love you. And she said, well, that goes without saying. So got a big laugh from everybody in on the meeting, like it does every time. But as a result, it would be easy for me to think, well, maybe my mom didn't love me. But now that I know the 5 love languages, I know without a doubt that her love language was acts of service. And she spent her whole life caring for Dad and working and creating a home so that my brother and sister and I could go to college, so that we could, do these things. And she loved me very well through her language. I just had to figure out that's what it was. And so for me, that makes it much easier to love my mother now, because I do have that understanding that yes, she may never tell me she loves me, but she loves me. She showed me she loved me. And so that can be very redeeming for a lot of our relationships once we understand the 5 love languages.
Yeah, what feels like not being loved is not, it's often a perception and not reality. Yes. Let's talk a little bit more about that, because that's one of the things I found really, really important about the book. Let me see first of all, I do want you to just take a moment to go over what those 5 love languages are for those who may not have read the book. But beyond just what the love languages themselves are, perhaps for me, the most profound thing about that book and about just learning to love each other well in any way, no matter what kind of model you're going to apply to it, is that how we express that. And our natural way of expressing it isn't always the way that someone needs it expressed. So your mom's natural way of communicating, unfortunately, was not necessarily the way that really spoke clearly to your soul until many, many years later. I mean, somewhere inside of you, you knew you were loved, but as a child, there was that ache. And I think that can happen for all of us. I think all of us can relate to having been loved by somebody where we know we're probably loved or we are loved, but they just really aren't loving us the way that we wish they would. And what I think for me as a parent, I'm always hoping, and as a spouse, frankly, as a wife, I'm always hoping to learn how to love my kids and my husband in a way they need and want to be loved, not just the way that's most comfortable for me to show them. So, and the book does explain that fairly well. So can you give us while I'm looking at questions here, I'm trying to
Okay.
double pass. Can you give us a quick overview of what the five love languages are, and then explain that a little bit more about how we express and communicate that?
Sure. So there are five love languages, and these are concepts that Dr. Gary Chapman came up with, and he is a licensed marriage counselor and counselor for other things than just marriage. And he wrote his first book in 1995 or so about love languages for couples. And so these are the five love languages he came up with. And some people, or he would tell you that every person has a primary love language, one that is their strongest way of speaking, and many people have a secondary one, a second one that they speak well. And if you, after hearing this, want to go and take the quiz, just go to his website, the5lovelanguages.com, and that's the digit 5, and you can take the online quiz. And there are quizzes for adults, for singles, for married couples, for children, for teens, and all sorts of quizzes that you can take. So the five love languages are, first of all, words of affirmation, and that is speaking encouraging words to someone and also giving them heartfelt compliments. And they're the people, that's the saying I love you kind of person. And this can be done verbally. It can also be done written or through a text or leave a note, you know, any of those things where you're communicating it through words. So that's words of affirmation. The second one is quality time. And quality time means spending time with that person. And it's not time next to each other on the couch scrolling through your phone. It is time spent looking face to face, doing an activity together, playing a game, maybe working on a project, but talking and having your full attention on that other person. That's quality time. Third is acts of service. And this, as I mentioned, was my mother's. I would say my dad's was probably quality time looking back. He was a real people person. And I think his disability, because he had to stay home, maybe turned him into a quality time person because he just craved people and they had to come to him. He couldn't very often go to them. But back to acts of service, that is doing things for somebody else. So that is my love language also. So I appreciate nothing more than having my husband say, I'll do the dishes for you, or I'll take out the garbage, or that kind of thing. It can also be just, you know, bringing them a cup of tea, whatever, an act of service. And the thing to remember about showing love through acts of service is you need to do what that person wants, not what you think they want. So, because that kind of twists it into accomplishing what you want instead of what they want. So acts of service. The next one is physical touch, and this is a non-sexual form of touch. This is the people who like to have a pat on their shoulder, their hair ruffled. They like to give high fives. They like to sit close to you on the couch. They might like a woolly blanket, or, you know, anything that has a lot of texture or feel to it. That's physical touch. That is my husband's love language. And you mentioned that we live intergenerationally with my daughter's son-in-law, and their 2 kids. 3 of the 4 adults in our house are physical touch people. I am the lonely little petunia in the onion patch who is acts of service. So I have to work really hard to, instead of offering to hang up my husband's coat, to give him a hug when he gets home. That's what he really wants. He could care less if I hang up his coat. He has to remember to do that kind thing for me instead of always wanting to just give me a hug or squeeze my hand or whatever. That doesn't mean much to me. It means a lot to him. And then the last one is gifts. And this is giving and receiving gifts. These are the people who are always giving you that little thing that like is just exactly what you didn't know you wanted. But they know, and because they watch and they see what you enjoy, and because getting things they enjoy means so much to them, they are constantly wanting to give you that. And when they receive gifts from you, they just light up. So that can be the gift of an item, something bought, but it doesn't have to be. It can be very inexpensive. It can be something you find along a walk. If you know that somebody likes birds and you find a bird feather and give it to them, that's going to light them up. It can also be giving them a card, giving them the gift of time, whatever. You're giving them some sort of gift. And it's important to remember that that primary language we have, as you mentioned, Lisa, is not necessarily how the other person hears love or experiences love. So if you love somebody, it's important for you in that relationship to know one another's love languages and then learn to speak their language to show them love and help them learn to speak your language to show you love so that you both feel equally loved. It's hard. It's kind of like learning a second language. You know, if you're primarily an English speaker and you want to learn German or Spanish or French, it's not easy, but you can learn to do it well enough to communicate to the other person. And the fact that you take the time to do it means a whole lot to that other person.
Yeah, it does. It's kind of a funny analogy, but if we were trying to speak to somebody in Spanish, tell somebody who only speaks Spanish that we love them, and all we would speak is English, they would never understand that we love them because they don't understand our language.
Exactly.
You'd have to learn their language. And just even saying it in English louder and louder still doesn't mean it. And yet that's kind of how we work a lot of times in our families. We try something, it doesn't work, so we try to do it more or louder, and then we give up or get bitter that they didn't understand or receive it or something.
Right. Like, okay, I bought you this, but you didn't notice it, so I'll buy something bigger or more expensive and bigger and bigger. And finally it's like, they don't love me. They just aren't listening. Yeah. Well, they can't hear it. That's the issue.
Yeah. Yeah. Boy, we have to ask her, we have to pray a lot, don't we? Just asking the Lord to give us ears to hear and to know when we are truly being loved, and that the intention is to show us love, even if somebody's not getting it done well, and vice versa, asking him to be gracious to us and to help us to know how to love others around us. The 5 love languages are such a wonderful, like you said, basic framework to allow us to go to and just kind of make a lifelong journey of learning more and more examples. The book does a great job of giving a lot of lists and examples that can help inspire us and think out of the box and how to do that.
And those came from parents. And this is important for us with our spouse, but it's also really important with our kids. We need to learn what their love languages are and learn to speak them to them. Our kids with special needs and disabilities and their typical siblings, so that they feel loved. And the nice thing about the love languages is once you know their love language, you don't have to waste a lot of time and energy doing stuff that doesn't mean anything to them. You can really hone in on what matters to them and show them the love they need, even within all your other caregiving duties, because that is our reality as caregiving parents. We spend a lot of time and a lot of money and a lot of energy caregiving. And so the time we have left over, the resources we have left over, we have to use really well to speak love to the family that isn't, receiving the care, and to the child or the parent or whoever we are caring for. We want to be sure that they understand we love them as best they can. And so if we know their love language, we can speak it to them really well.
Yeah, I hope people didn't miss what you said there, because it's really helpful when we're so stretched already. Knowing how to do that in the way that's most meaningful to our child is so helpful, because we can almost quit, not entirely, but we don't have to put so much effort into sometimes all the different ways we're trying to care for our kids. If we knew the ways that really matter the most to them, we can hone in on those and release ourselves sometimes from some of the efforts we're scrambling around, trying to make the perfect dinner or whatever, when maybe nutritionally that's important, but it's not as impressive to anybody as we think it is. And yet then there's another husband who may be really blessed, or kids on special occasions on their birthday might be really blessed to have a special meal. It's just wonderful to think of all the different examples, but to also at the same time be sort of freed from some of them and not feel like we have to do them all. Learning to, let's talk about some specifics in a minute, but before we go further, let me just let people know too, a couple things logistically again, is that we are taking questions online, and Jolene and I will both really follow this post endlessly, really. So if people had questions tomorrow and watched it later, they could post them and we'll both probably see them and be able to respond. But today, if you have questions and you want to put them in the comments, we'll try to address them live right now. So please do that. Also, we've got this giveaway bundle we're doing. I am offering the book Jesus Let's Talk along with a copy of Jolene's book, Sharing Love Abundantly, with special needs families. We're going to put those two together in a little package, and anybody who comments today, either during this live or yet until about midnight tonight, we will enter them into a drawing and then pull out a name and I'll contact you to get mailing information and send you a copy of those two books tomorrow. So please let us know what you're finding helpful about this or what questions you're having, and whatever comment you make will qualify you for the giveaway.
Yes.
We were talking here about, first of all, there's just so many obstacles in a special needs family, especially. I was thinking through a lot of them, from stress and grief and time and interruptions that all get in the way of our often feeling like we're doing as we'd like to be doing in terms of loving on especially our kids, but often our spouses too. And then we walk around with guilt, and that debilitates us. And you talk a lot about those in the books, and even the trauma books and their trauma book. What are some of the things that make it well, you also talk about the love tank, and that we all kind of have a need to feel loved in certain ways. What are those obstacles that prevent us from filling each other up?
Sure. You mentioned a few of them. You mentioned time. That's one of the big obstacles, because we've got so much going on. We don't have a lot of time to spend on relationships. Finances can be a big thing. We spend, there may be one parent who can't go out and work because they're staying home to be the caregiver. And so they're living on one income. And then therapies, insurance deductibles, all that kind of stuff gets expensive. If you have in-home caregivers, some of those things can be very expensive. So there's not a lot of money to spend on showing someone that you love them. Guilt and grief can be a big deal. We think we're not doing enough, and we're also grieving often the loss of what we thought our child's life would be like. And then combined with that, if you are co-parenting, one spouse is probably grieving at a different speed than the other spouse. And so they kind of get upset because how come so-and-so doesn't feel, how come my wife or my husband isn't as upset about this as I am? Does that mean they don't love my child or love me as much? So all that stuff can get in there and kind of make us a little crazy. And then of course the enemy gets in there and takes all that stuff and like blows it up. So that can be a real obstacle. Isolation. As parents raising kids with special needs, we can't get out as often. We can't spend time with other people. We can't get away. And then we can't develop those friend and church relationships maybe that would give us support. And the people that do want to support us really don't understand. And so we pull away. So isolation can be big. Geographic separation. I mentioned at the beginning, my son had his surgery 750 miles away from where he was born. My husband and I went down to be with him at first, but then my husband had to go back and keep working while I stayed with our baby in intensive care. And that happened more than once. I have a friend whose little boy had, this was many years ago, but he had a brain tumor and finally passed away from it. But they spent, I think, 6 months seeking treatment, at, I think, St. Jude's, and I live in Iowa and she does too. So far away, that's really hard on a marriage. Then worry about the future, I think, is the big one. We as parents worry about two things. We worry, what if my child dies young and doesn't get a full life? And we worry about that and grieve about that. And then on the opposite end, we worry, what if I die before my child does? And so then we're worried about who's going to take care of my child. Are there going to be enough resources? Is anybody going to love my child as much as I do? So that's a big thing that can cause a lot of, use up a lot of energy and create obstacles in families. And then just the lack of support. Often people don't know what to do. They don't know what to say. We have kind of pulled away because we're home caregiving, and they think everything is kind of resolved and on an even keel. They don't realize that we really could use some help, and that lack of support just kind of drains us and can lead to despair instead of hope if we aren't careful. So those are kind of the big ones that I talk about in this book. Oh, one I didn't put in that I've been told many times since I should have was sleep deprivation.
Yes.
Because many of our children don't sleep. So all of these other things are made worse when you don't get enough sleep.
Yeah. Well, yeah, in fact, I would argue that that stress and fatigue are probably the most significant, that almost a lot of those other things you listed ultimately can fall underneath those two things.
Mm-hmm.
And when we're well rested, even the stress is reduced, which
Yes.
you could argue self-care in general is so important. It often feels selfish, but to take a nap is not an indulgence if it becomes a blessing to your children and your spouse, because you're now a well-rested mom or dad. You know,
exactly.
I've really had to remind myself of that over and over the years, because for me, being able to lay down and take a nap is not only scary because I'm worried that I won't get up for 2 hours, but a power nap can really, scientifically and practically speaking, rejuvenate a person and give us a whole new perspective, a new capacity to be more compassionate, to live more harmoniously with people, to be more in tune with what those around us are needing. And boy, I've been, even in my own counseling ministry, talking a lot during the COVID season about learning to live in cooperation with each other, complimenting each other, not in the sense of making a compliment to somebody, but understanding each other and living in ways that are compassionate to one another's needs. That's much harder to do when we're tired.
Yes.
You know, I often think that the enemy really likes to use all these obstacles that are real, but uses them to kind of distract us from the true root thing. You know, fatigue, stress, guilt, grief, all these things are real, but underneath, if all of those things prevent us from loving, especially our family members, well, then really the root issue is possibly perspective and priorities. You know, because if we really kept loving our family at the core of what our goal is, then we would deal with the grief, we would deal with the guilt, we would deal with these things that have become obstacles. And instead of chafe at them or become overwhelmed by them or stuck by them, we would genuinely take time to work through them, knowing that that ultimately is going to help us love our family well. So while the love languages of themselves are a powerful, powerful tool, recognizing the obstacles and dealing with them head on is also a really powerful way to release ourselves and our families to love each other well.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah. We do have a couple of questions, so let me read them out here. One is, what are the indicators that you are speaking someone's love language?
Oh, that's a really good question. I think one indicator is, and this I think is especially true of our children with special needs and maybe those who are not very verbal. If what we are doing with them is calming to them, or our spouse or whoever, if what we do is calming to them, we're probably speaking their language. If their face lights up, I think it's another one. If they ask you to do that thing again, that's a really good indicator that you've hit something. And just that, you know, if that person acts like they feel secure, and if they act like they feel well loved, Like we talked about this love tank, which is, we have to be filled up with love. And it's just kind of like what you were talking about with sleep deprivation. When we don't get enough sleep, everything just kind of goes bananas and we can't handle things as well. The same thing is true when our love tank is empty. When we don't feel loved, we cannot respond in a loving way. We cannot see clearly, and our behavior suffers. So if someone's behavior and their relationship with you seems to be improved after you've spoken what you think is their language, you're probably right. A couple other things, and this is true, this works really well with kids who have special needs and disabilities, like intellectual disabilities or communication things, where you really can't, you can't ask them or have them do the quiz. You have to observe them. So what calms that child, or I think we could say with an adult or our spouse or whatever, what motivates that child?
Yeah.
If you say, I'm going to do this with you in 10 minutes, could you clean up your toys? And they go and do it right away. You may be speaking their language. If it's, I'll go for a walk, they may be a quality time. If we'll have a tickle fest, they're a physical touch. If it's, I want to sit down and tell you just what I thought was wonderful about you today, there are words of affirmation. If it's gifts, it's like, I have something special that I'm going to be giving to you in just a minute. But first we need to get these toys picked up. Yeah. Then they're probably a gifts person. And what's the last one? Acts of service. As soon as we're done with, or if you say, I'm going to sit down and help you pick up your toys, and then they get to work, they may be an acts of service person. So whatever motivates that person, that can be an indicator. And then the last one is, I always forget one, but I have my little cheat sheet. Where does that person choose to spend time? When they're asking you, can we, mommy or dad or sweetheart, let's go to a movie together. I'd love it if let's go for a walk. Let's sit on the couch and just cuddle for a little bit. What is it that motivates them, that they want to do? Or how do they show love to you? You've probably figured out their love language. Yeah. So, and when you speak it to them, they're going to light up. They're going to just be more content. And like I said, they're going to be more calm.
Yeah. Those are great examples. Thank you. I think of so many from our own family, and even tone of voice in our family matters so much. Carly, for one, I could put my husband in that category too, but we won't throw him under a bus, but tone of voice really matters to a lot of people. I grew up in a pretty intense household where people had varying tones all the time and you didn't think a lot about it. But some people are really sensitive to tone of voice. Carly, being nonverbal herself, seems really in tune with somebody's tone of voice. And so when you talk about motivation, for example, I can say the same sentence, but the tone of voice that I use with her is totally a turn on or a turn off in terms of whether she's going to respond to me. If she perceives in your tone that she's being challenged, if there's a firmness, sometimes that kind of helps reset her and shock her into, oh, I guess Mom's serious. But there are many times where she's like suddenly felt challenged, and so she's going to be up for it, and she's just going to dig in her heels and be stubborn. That I think parents, we see that kind of thing all the time where we've kind of learned, and yet it's kind of like the shouting thing again. We still keep doing it even though we know it doesn't work. Which is a great segue into Hesed. Is that how you say that word?
Yes, Hesed.
Yeah, there's a question on Facebook about that, and I wanted to talk about that anyway because it's so huge on so many levels. Let me see. You tell us what Hesed is, and I'll look at my notes because I had a couple questions.
Here's the definition from the book. Hesed is a merciful, intentional love. Notice those two words, merciful. So it's like nobody's earned it. It's just merciful. We're doing it. And it's intentional. So we have to think about it and consider what we're doing. Hesed is a merciful, intentional love that intervenes on behalf of loved ones and comes to their rescue. So that Hesed is that, that love that is basically, this is the definition of Jesus.
Yeah.
The merciful, intentional love that intervenes on behalf of loved ones and comes to their rescue. Isn't that what Jesus did?
Yeah.
Now, we as humans, as totally human, can never show that great a love, but we can model that same love to our loved ones. And this is actually a Hebrew word. So this was pre-New Testament. So, in a way, it's kind of like that foreshadowing of Christ.
Yes.
So that Hesed is something that we have to use in our relationships. And if we can be intentional and just kind of wipe the slate clean without thinking, this isn't about something my spouse, my child, my friend deserves. I'm just doing this because I love them. And I know that this is their love language. Here's the intentional part. So I'm going to show them love this way. And I'm going to do it when they need it the most. That's that intentional love coming to their rescue. Yeah. So that's like when my husband, if I'm tired at night and there's something that I need to get done, and I'm not an evening person and he knows that, he'll just come and take it and say, here, let me take care of that for you. Mm-hmm. And then that's me when I'm tired at night and I'm already in bed because I'm not an evening person and he is. So when he comes to bed, that when he bends over and wakes me up to hug me and give me a kiss, I hug and kiss him back. That's intentional because that's what means the most to him.
Yeah. There's a page I have here highlighted from the book. Mm-hmm. You give great examples here just now you have, and in the book too. And one that always stuck out to me from the moment I read the book, because I've seen this play out in my own family different ways over the years, is a mom practices Hesed when her tube-fed baby tolerates only breast milk, so she pumps for a year. A dad whose daughter with autism is melting down at the toy store demonstrates Hesed by standing guard over her until she calms down. That's the one that stuck out to me, because I thought, how often do we have a toddler who's feeling emotional, intense emotions? They don't yet have the language or a nonverbal. I have a 22-year-old who can melt down at times and not have a way, a voice, words to communicate to me all her emotion and what she's feeling. And it's so tempting for a parent to get frustrated at that, whether it's in the privacy of my home or out in public in a grocery store. And we tend to stand. I remember standing over my toddler saying, "Stop it, get up, we need to eat dinner," whatever. And instead of stopping for a moment and thinking, what do they need from me right now? Mm-hmm. What will connect to their heart and show them love? They're not necessarily just being rebellious. It feels to me like rebellion right now, but that's a child screaming to feel comforted and loved. The same way a mom lays down in bed at night exhausted, but yearning to feel comforted and loved by her husband. We have to, it plays all the way into marriage. I'm reminded this week when I was reading all of this about a book I read in marriage and called Awaken Love. It's an excellent, excellent book for couples to read. And it talks about connecting to the heart of your spouse. And part of, even whether it's through, like you mentioned, non-sexual touch is so important in the love languages. And yet even sexual touch, we sometimes resist our spouse when they clearly need even sex to feel comfort at the end of a day. And we withhold that sometimes because we're frustrated that we didn't get what our love tank needed that day, or we're just plain exhausted. And yet, what if in God's mercy and by his strength, we took the power nap at 4 p.m. that sustained us through the evening so that we could give our spouse that gift at the end of the day, and ultimately viewed even that intimacy with our spouse as an essential exchange of mercy and comfort. Mm-hmm. That ultimately, through that connection in our case often has to be a beginning of a day because it just can't, for various logistical reasons, happen at the end of a day. If whenever we get creatively have to make those kind of connections happen, that love that happens in that moment, we don't even always realize at the outset how important and powerful it can be to just stop and think, how does this person need me to love them right now? Whether it's the screaming toddler on the floor or the spouse in bed exhausted at night, but really with a spoken or unspoken yearning for connection.
Mm-hmm. You know, another thing I think we need to consider is not just with our children and our spouses, and this is maybe more speaking to the support network around families of kids with special needs, or even when you meet a stranger out and about who is caring for a child with special needs. Emily Colson tells a wonderful story. Her son Max has autism, and when he was young, he had a lot of meltdowns, and they were in the grocery store, and he was having a terrible meltdown, and Emily just had to stand over him, waiting for him to get over it, the sensory overload he was dealing with. And she says she's looking down at him, and all of a sudden there's another set of feet next to her, and it's a woman she didn't know who said to her, "I'll just wait here with you until he's done." What a gift, what an act of Hesed. Yes. For the young mom, Emily, to know that she wasn't alone. Yep. That she had somebody, you know, she needed something like, could you go to my car and get me this? There was someone right there to help.
Not judging.
We can do those things for the people we meet all the time. You know, it's as simple often as opening a door for someone who's trying to get in, or, you know, leaving the handicapped spots for the people who need them. Yeah. And yeah.
Such a great example.
Mm-hmm.
My husband Larry loves to give the example of Job all the time and his friends, and how, you know, they were doing great until they started talking. How often we need a friend to just be there with us, to just stand there. And as a parent or as a spouse, sometimes we just need to stop talking and just be there.
Mm-hmm. You know? Yeah. We do. I was on a plane one time, and there was a woman whose little 3 or 4-year-old would not behave, and we were getting ready to take off, and she wouldn't get in her seatbelt, and the stewardess had to come over and say to her, "We can't take off until she's in her seatbelt." And so this mom is working. You could tell she was about near tears, and she finally got her in her seatbelt. And I took out a little piece of paper, and I just wrote on it, "You're being a good mom." And I handed it to her because I remembered, you know, being in that situation and just like, oh my gosh, they're all watching me and they all hate me. And, you know, I'm holding everybody up and they think my child. And I was like, at least I can give her that. And she just looked at me and just started crying. Yeah. You know,
I'm sure.
One person to show you Hesed, and we can each be that one person every day somewhere.
Yeah. Yeah. Such great stuff. We're zooming right up on the clock hour. I would love to go longer, but we'll honor people's time. And I can tell you, honestly, if you get that book, every question you'll have will be answered. The more I read, Jolene, when I got that book, I was excited even before I got it. I just thought this is going to be awesome. But I was quite amazed. And shouldn't have been, because you're always so thorough, but you have a gift for being able to see all the different layers of our complex lives and make sure you hit every note. That book does not miss a beat, and I was reminded of it yet again when I went back to my notes on it this week. So I just can really encourage people. I get it, we don't have a lot of time to read books, but that's one that should be on every shelf of every special family.
And it's only this thick.
Yeah. It's not
we don't have a lot of time.
Yeah. And you also referenced something. I wish, you know, we probably should do a whole webinar on this, and you'd be a good person to have it on.
Sure.
But the extended family stuff, like you talked about the co-generational living situation that you're in, very much on purpose. Very, you and your daughter do some kind of podcast about it too, don't you?
We used to. We don't anymore because life got too busy, but we did for a while.
Are those archived though somewhere?
I don't know if it is or not.
Okay. Okay. Well, anyway, you know about that stuff and you do a good job of talking about it. But I will say, as it relates to loving our family well, even in extended families, I really want to talk more about that in the future because
yeah, I'd love to.
I remember one time our oldest daughter was dating a young man whose mother had severe physical disabilities. And she and I would have a number of conversations about how difficult it is when we're with extended family, holidays and that sort of thing, and how easy it is to descend into resentment and bitterness. Everyone else is having a great time playing games and so forth, and it's we can't because we're busy caught up in caregiving, or even if in the moment we're not, we're constantly in the back of our mind thinking of what that person over there needs. Mm-hmm. Carly needs trips to the bathroom frequently or needs to stay hydrated. So somebody's always thinking about how long has it been since she's had something to drink, and you can't play a game without kind of constantly checking or setting alarms to remind yourself she needs another drink now, or did anybody get her one, and who's gotten her the last time to the bathroom, all that kind of stuff, while everyone else can just relax and watch a movie. And so but this mom of the young man my daughter had been dating and I talked about, and she really opened my eyes to how we can, without realizing it, have something she called a closed system. As a family, I can have my own immediate family at my sister's house for Thanksgiving with grandparents and everybody else there. And me and Larry and our two older daughters have this almost unspoken rhythm going on about who's taking Carly here and who's doing that nobody else around even knows is happening necessarily, or they might be aware of it and desperately want to be able to know how to enter into that and help. But we really haven't made room for them.
Right. We don't let them in.
Yeah. So it really kind of fits into this loving well thing too. And interestingly, you talked, and we'll wrap it up kind of with this idea, but way back early in this conversation when you were talking about all the obstacles that keep us from loving each other well, and you mentioned worry and the different layers of worry and the worry about the future and fears and so forth. To me, it's interesting to think about how when we love each other well right now, when we don't even look at COVID as a distraction from life, but an opportunity to spend time honing in right now in our given circumstances on how to love each other better, it's going to pay off into the future in ways we don't expect or imagine, so that we don't even have to worry the same. As our family learns how to love each other better and let others into our loving space at a holiday or whatever, we have been discovering that means that we now have cousins and other generations who know how to love Carly really well, which means that when and if something were to happen to me and or Larry, our daughters, who then step into some type of caregiving supportive role in a new level, have a whole system of people around them who are already well equipped to love Carly well and to love them well in their new role. It just becomes this ripple.
It does.
Beautiful fruit.
Because what happens then is that extended family that's now part of the caring, when they meet other people with disabilities and special needs, they are better able to create relationships with them and know what to do and be an example. And it just makes things better for everyone.
It really does. It really does. And you could apply that analogy to a whole church family.
Oh, yes.
On and on and on. So just as we think about the importance of community, all kinds of community, to our special needs families, learning to love our family well and to have an open system about that, it really pays off.
It really does. Yes.
And it's the way that Jesus wanted us to live in the first place.
That's right.
Oh, yeah. Really good stuff. This has been awesome. I really appreciate you, Jolene, and all the work that you do. And I know you've got a couple other projects up your sleeve. And so even to the extent that people buy your books, they are helping you get the next books out, because publishers are more attractive to any of us authors every time our previous books sell. We are more credible to them as a future good investment. So please go out and get Jolene's books, because I promised you, she's got some amazing stuff in the works, and she needs publishers to know that that's worthwhile stuff and that there's people out there who want it and will benefit.
And the Sharing Love Abundantly, you can get in hardcover or in paperback, Kindle, and there's an audio version. And I actually did the voice work for that. And my son-in-law did Dr. Chapman's part, because my son-in-law is a trained actor. So he's the one that's really fun to listen to on it.
Very good. That's cool. It's little secret stuff. Good to know. Yeah. So, gosh, where to wrap up here? So thank you for reminding them where they can get that. Amazon is the best place. Is that right? Okay.
I think so. Yeah. But you can get it through your local bookstores too. And I support local bookstores.
Okay. And we try to get there with our masks on. Where can they find you, Jolene?
I have a website called differentdream.com. And that is where I blog about parenting children with special needs and disabilities. My other blog is jolenephilo.com. And if you go there, you'll find out about what I'm working on fiction-wise, because I would like to break into fiction. So those are the two best places. You can also find me on Facebook at A Different Dream for My Child, or Jolene Philo, or Down the Gravel Road. I have a few different places you can find me.
Great. Well, after we finish up here, I'm going to, just for everybody who's been listening and wants more resources, more suggestions, some we've already mentioned and others maybe didn't have time, I'm going to put in the description or in the comments a list of some resources also that can help us to love our families well.
Yes.
And let's see. If you want to join us for the Real Talk Multiply group, that online virtual Zoom meeting that we have every Tuesday at 2, just contact me about that. I think we're going to start doing a Real Talk live stream like this about once a month. And we're talking about in August doing a signing circle with Carly's signing tutor, where we just practice some signs and have some conversation. And so we may have Carly and her friend and her tutor and a sister or caregiver all along for that ride, and invite anybody who wants to do signing circle with us in August. So watch for that. Follow the Walk Right In Ministries Facebook page to get updates on that, and go to our website and subscribe to our newsletter so that you're sure to not miss any of these kinds of updates. And then I know that as we get a little bit closer to the holidays, in October, probably we'll do a session on this whole closed system, open system, extended family kind of conversation, somewhere around there. So stay tuned for this stuff, and please comment and let us know what other subjects might be helpful. There's a lot of people in the special needs and disability ministry community doing these kind of things. So even if we don't do it here at Real Talk, we know there are others who are doing some really awesome webinars. Key Ministry for one, and then Talk with Doc at SOAR Special Needs Ministry. Those guys are doing some amazing, regularly scheduled stuff. So if you need more content and you like this kind of format, check out their Facebook pages and websites and stuff too, because they're all in the archives. Even you've done a couple with both of those, and they're all excellent. And one focused on trauma just recently, last week with Doc, I think, on trauma.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So just endless resources. So if you're needing them and you don't know where to find them, contact us and we'll help you find them. So let me just wrap us up with a quick word of prayer. I'm so grateful for you, Jolene. Thank you. Heavenly Father, most of all, we thank you. You are so specific with us and so encouraging to us. We are so easily overwhelmed, Lord. Our lives are complicated and demanding, and we can feel exhausted. And so today, Lord, I pray that this conversation is another breath of fresh air that you have brought into the lives of many special needs families. And I pray, dear Jesus, that you would remind us that nothing is too complicated for you. And Lord, that we don't have to be perfect. We are just in a growing process, becoming more and more like you, and ultimately you are our model. So we thank you for that. And we pray in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you, Jolene. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. Great to be with you.
Bye-bye.
Again soon. Bye-bye.